Welcome, friends, to the second Sunday of Lent. The Diocese of Central Pennsylvania is celebrating 40 Ways, a Heart for Social Justice. Before we begin, I'd like to ask a question. I wonder what is in your heart for social justice? Now, I realize that across this diocese, many of our convocations and congregations actually cultivate a strong commitment to serving the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the sick and suffering, giving freedom to those who are oppressed. And even during this time of COVID, these ministries continue to grow. Discovering our heart for social justice, I believe, is critical during this challenging time. This Lent, we have reached 500,000 deaths from the pandemic. We know that racial injustice permeates our institutions, and environmental challenges include the exposure of economic and social disparities. The Reverend Gina Campbell, in a recent formation webinar, remarked, "The true battle of our time is being fought in human imagination." This statement was kind of the heart of, or the organizing principle of, Gina's message, as she invited us to consider what sparks our imagination. During prayer, during scripture, and even when we fast. What spark is ignited in our hearts? Our gospel lesson for this day, Mark chapter 8, is a passage for discovery. In fact, it has a huge potential, I believe, to spark our imaginations. To be sure, there is a lament, fear, suffering, and even death, where Jesus reveals the very heart of God. You see, Jesus was with his disciples. In a deep moment of trust and teaching, they shared a relationship. And while he was teaching, he stopped and he said, he will suffer, be rejected, and die. At that moment of sharing, the disciples' hopes were dashed. Anger displaced imagination to the point that Peter actually rebuked Jesus, his beloved rabbi. Then Jesus turned to him and spoke something that truly must have sparked their imaginations. How do I imagine that? Because they stayed with him. In essence, Jesus told them all, set your mind on divine things. Set your mind on divine things. A key to igniting imaginations, theirs and ours. For a moment, consider the question, what is it in your heart about social justice? Imagine places of pain, rejection, suffering, and death that you have experienced, places of oppression and othering, and imagine in those places the gospel witness of love that breaks open with compassion, God's justice. You see, Gina, in that same webinar, warned us that when the church does not speak from her moral imagination, in its place, diabolical imagination sets in, stripping human beings of the image of God that already lives within them. I wonder, what is in your heart for social justice? What is your spark of imagination that brings you to life to live that gospel message that we are all loved and all made in the image of God? About a year and a half ago, pre-COVID, the Reverend Becca Stevens was with us. She's the founder of Thistle Farms. And I will never forget her message. She said, if we are going to love one another, we need to tend to the very basics. You see, her faith-based model for developing housing for women who are either coming off the streets or out of prison or even coming out of a wilderness experience. She said, it's not hard to find lost sheep. It's surprisingly easy. It's one person at a time, lighting the way through healing, witnessing to the life-giving, liberating love of God. That's Becca's spark of imagination. Thistle Farm communities, where everyone is greeted and loved as they are in the image of God. So I wonder, what sparks your imagination this day? What is in your heart for social justice? Imagine one thing. Set your mind on the divine. Then ask, how does scripture and prayer inform and guide your response? Jesus was very clear. To become my followers, deny yourselves, take up your cross, and then follow me. The path to the cross is true. But every time we take time this season of Lent and go out to the places that are unconnected or disconnected, imagine the ways to respond to God's love. Because there is where we discover what is in our hearts for social justice. And when you do, let us know. Send an email, write a note, give a call, as we all continue to create communities of amazing grace.